Hey, you've got your story ideas down and now you're ready to start writing your book. So the next step is getting a good outline. You want to have an outline of what the plot is going to look like, what the story is going to look like. And so today we're going to talk about outlining.
You have a story to tell, but you don't know where to start. Let me show you how to free your story. I teach you how to write and how to dig deep in your soul to release your story and make a difference in the world.
Welcome to the Julia Monte channel. If we're just meeting, I am Julia Monte. I'm a women's fiction author. And today let's talk about outlining your story. So you're probably, hopefully have an idea now of what you want to create. What do you want to write about? What are some of the ideas for your story? Who are your characters? And now you're ready to actually create your outline, create the plot so that you're ready to start writing. Now, you may not be someone who really loves to outline. I don't really love to outline either. And in fact, I started my career by actually not outlining because I just didn't think it was necessary. I kind of had the story in my head, and so I would just start writing. And I loved it because I kind of discovered the story as it was created, right? So as I wrote it, I discovered what was going to happen. And the only problem with that is sometimes what happened wasn't good, right? It wasn't really moving the story forward, or it was moving the story in a different direction than kind of what I had originally thought. So in my head, I kind of knew what the story was going to be about. I knew, not the exact scenes, but I kind of knew what the conflict was going to be for the character and for the story. And I knew where I kind of wanted to end it. I knew what the transformation was going to be for the character in my mind. So I figured as long as I kind of moved towards that, I'd be okay. And so for the most part, yes, but then the individual scenes that would pop up sometimes just didn't make sense. It's like, well, why is this happening? Why is she doing this? How is this helping? Why does the reader need to know this? So it helps to create just at least a brief outline, even if you don't really like to outline. So one of the things that I started doing when I was, when I started thinking I need to outline, and I also had an editor that said, can you send me an outline, which sort of horrified me because I thought, what do you mean? Like, what do you want? So I sat down to actually create an outline the way that I'd learned in college, right? So you create an outline with, the Roman numeral 1, and you have your main heading, and then you have your A, B, C, D, your headings that go below that. And I figured that that's what she wanted. So it's like, okay, chapter 1, like what's the main heading? I wasn't sure where to go with this until I actually started realizing and reading books on kind of outlining a novel and creating that plot. And I realized that, okay, not she doesn't want that kind of outline. At least I hoped she didn't, and she didn't. Okay, but I thought, okay, that's not really an outline for a novel. Works great for academic papers, but that's not what an editor would want, and it's not what I would want as a writer. I need an outline that really is the story of the plot with the main plot points that are going to be in the story, and really understanding what the crisis is and how the character is going to, work, or how I'm going to work the story so that the character experiences this critical moment somewhere in the midpoint of the book. And how am I going to resolve that, right? What are the things that have to happen in order for that to get resolved? So as I started reading tons of books and really starting to understand plotting a little bit better, one of the things that I noticed is like everything, it all stems from the same idea, okay, of the hero's journey. So it didn't really matter like who was presenting their thoughts or ideas on storytelling. The person that I met at a writers' conference and whose book I bought and who I was really influenced by was Christopher Vogler. and he wrote the writer's journey based on the hero's journey. And so he had the major stages that the hero goes through, and explained why those are important. And at first, when I first heard that, I even thought, well, I write romances at the time. I was writing romances, and how does that relate, right? How does this journey of adventure relate to a romance? And I didn't really think it did. Again, until I started understanding it more. And then I read other things that other romance writers wrote, how they incorporated the hero's journey, or, the hero's journey into their plotting. And it made sense. And I read about stories that, in movies. And the more I saw it and the more I read other people's interpretation of it, the more I realized it really all does boil down back to this. Okay. So that is how I outline my stories to this day. I've added a few things here and there, but pretty much I follow that, or at least I make sure that I'm hitting most of those points. Now, not every story has to hit every single point, but pretty much it follows that. So what I want to do is I want to kind of go over that a little bit today. Okay, and other authors that I have read since that, again, to me, it just seems like another version of the hero's journey, written in a different way. The plot points have different titles, but it's more or less follows that same format, that same structure. Okay, so one of them is James Scott Bell's Superstructure, and he outlines the 14. I think he calls them, signposts. Okay, that you have to meet, or that the character has to go through. And again, it's very similar again to the hero's journey. Like the character is still hitting those key points that he needs to hit at each, in each act of the story. Another one that is really good is Take Your Pants Off. Let's see, Take Your Pants Off, Outline Your Book for Faster, Better Writing by Libby Hawker, which again follows the same sort of plotting idea as the hero's journey. Save the Cat is another one that seems to be very popular. I've never used it. It's Blake Snyder's idea of story, idea of story structure, and again, it's very similar to the hero's journey. So what I'm going to talk about is the hero's journey, because I feel like they all are saying the same thing, just in a different version. Now, it helps, I think, to read different people, because when they say it differently, sometimes it just clicks differently. Chris Vogler's wording and methods is very, very close to is very close to the original mythic, like, hero's journey. And so he uses some of that language that some people, like I did at first, said, well, that doesn't seem like my characters aren't going through that adventure. They're not meeting with these mythical figures, and they're not doing that. But it's really just the titles and the language that he's using. So sometimes it helps to read other authors just to kind of see what, how they phrase it and how they say it. Sometimes that becomes a little clearer to you. So let's talk then about outlining using this idea of the hero's journey. So you're taking your novel, okay, and you're dividing it into 3 parts. And if you think of any good storyteller, we have a beginning, a middle, and an end. Okay, and that's the same thing. We have Act 1, we have Act 2, we have Act 3. So these 3 acts is our structure, is our outline, right? So in that first act, what needs to happen? What is happening in that act? So in the hero's journey, what happens is that this is where the character is introduced. This is where we see the characters sort of living in their normal life. We see what's going on in their life. So at this point, we probably will see a problem, right? So there's something not quite right in their ordinary life. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a story. So we have a problem. We have some kind of problem as this character is going through their life. They experience some kind of issue. Then they get the opportunity to fix the issue. And it's called the call to adventure. Okay, in Vogler's writing. and in the hero's journey. It's the call to adventure. So what does that mean? It just means that the character's experiencing a problem, and he gets the opportunity, or sometimes is forced into an opportunity to fix that problem. Maybe he gets fired. Things are not going well at his job. Maybe he gets, his spouse leaves him, his wife leaves him. Something happens, right? A disaster happens, an earthquake happens, something happens that is going to force him to leave this comfortable place, even if it's a miserable place, and do something different, try something different. And a lot of times the character doesn't want to, so they refuse the call, which is another part of this. Another one of the main points here that happens in that first act. Oftentimes they will refuse the act, or they'll say, "No, no, I'm not doing this." Right? But not always. This is one of the ones where sometimes the character really does want to change. They really do want to go on this adventure because they realize on their own that life isn't working out for me right now. This isn't going well. Yeah, it's going to be tough, but I need to do something different. And so they don't always refuse, but oftentimes they do refuse, or they try not to change their life because it's hard, right? Change is hard. And so even for a character, the character is going to want to not embark in something different and hard that could make his life even worse than the way it is now. So there is this refusal, and then there is the mentor. So they go to start, and sometimes, again, sometimes it's not always, and sometimes to me, the mentor seems to work better at the beginning of Act Two. But in the in the typical structure, it is part of Act One. Okay, so there's a mentor that comes in and is the guide in a way. It's going to guide this character into the new world. It's going to give the character advice. It's going to support the character in some way. Oftentimes it's somebody that's a little older, right? That has some experience and has some knowledge. And so in that first act, if you've introduced all of that, right, then you're prepared to go into the bulk of your story. So in your outline, instead of having that Roman numeral 1, 2, 3, you can if you want to. It's much better to have these main points, right? So write down, ordinary world. What is it like? A call to adventure. What is the call? What is the opportunity? Is the character going to refuse? If the character is refusing the call, how is he refusing? What's he doing? And then who are you going to give them as a guide or a partner? It doesn't have to be. Again, it doesn't have to even be a human, right? Depending on the story. If we think of stories like Mulan, she had a little cricket. I don't remember what he was anymore. Mushu, what was he? I think he was a cricket. Anyhow, it was, it was a little animal, right? This is an animated film. But a lot of times it doesn't have to be a human. It could be something else, but it's some kind of mentor, something that's going to help the character into this adventure that they're going to embark. Okay, so this brings us now into the second act, which is the longest part of the book. Some of these books will now break Act Two into two parts. So Act Two is, you have the first part where you meet a certain doorway or threshold, and then you go to the second part. But in general, you have this large second part of your story that is going to take up most of your book. And the goal of the second part now is the character enters into a new world, into the new adventure, right? And begins to be tested, begins to have experiences that are going to show whether this character is kind of worthy of the final reward that he's going to get at the end of the book. Okay, so there are tests. The character meets friends. The character meets enemies or obstacles that are going to stand in his or her way. And so most of this second part of the book, or middle part of the book, is the character going through these things. And so that the character has ups and downs, right? So it looks like he's reaching his goal, but then he has some kind of obstacle that, that it's a setback, right? That goes back down and then overcomes that setback and is able to start again going towards the goal of whatever it is they want. And then again, there's a setback. Okay. And then usually what happens is the character has a crisis point somewhere in the middle of the story. There's the main ordeal, the supreme ordeal, which is a large challenge. So maybe in that middle of that book, the character, usually it looks like things aren't going well, right? That he's not going to reach his goal. So how does the character deal with it? I think it's James Scott Bell who calls it this mirror moment where the character actually faces himself, right? Faces this thing and says, who am I to do this? Who am I? Who have I become? Who do I think I am? Those kind of questions that the character is going to ask in the middle of this book, because the character is now faced with a big challenge that he either isn't sure he can meet or that he realizes that he should be able to meet, but because of the person that he has become or who he is, he now can't meet it. So something big happens here, and this is the ordeal. This is the big part of the book where the character has to show, in order to move forward, right, that he can meet this challenge, that he can maybe change who he is in order to meet the challenge. So if he's become this very terrible, horrible person that is not, is not a great husband, is not a great father, something, right? Is not a great employee, is not a faithful person, is not whatever, right? This is the point where the character realizes, like, that wasn't who I really wanted to be. And now what do I do? Because if I continue that way, I'm never going to find the happiness that I want. And so the character has to go through this understanding so that he can move forward. Okay, so sometimes it's a physical change he has to make, sometimes it's an emotional or a mental change that he has to make in order to get through it. So if he does this, then he gets sort of a reward of some type, right? So he starts to move towards his goal again, and it looks like things are going to be like he's going to do well. But then there is a final challenge, right? So at the end of Act Two, there's usually something that happens that, again, it's like, okay, you said you were going to change, but are you really going to change? Here's this kind of last sort of challenge. And then you're kind of done with Act Two at this point, and you go into Act Three that shows how all of this unravels. So when he's faced with this sort of last challenge or last threshold or whatever, last door that he has to go through, you enter into Act Three. Now, the main points or the main, outline points, I guess, that you want to have here in Act Three is the road back. So now he's headed back towards towards his happy ending, towards a resolution to his problem. So if he handled that last challenge that really tested the decision that he made in the middle of the book, if he did well, okay, so now we're heading back where he has to deal with some of the last issues in order to get back to his ordinary life or his ordinary world. Now he's not going to the ordinary world isn't going to be exactly the same as it was at the beginning because he's a changed person, right? So the ordinary world now is going to be a better ordinary world than it was before. So if he returns to his life, it's not going to be the same life as it was before because he's made these changes, because he's learned his lessons. So he's one of the points there in the hero's journey is resurrection. He's now become a different person, right? So he's no longer that same person that he was at the beginning of the story. So the road back is, all the things that he has to do to get back to his ordinary life. The resurrection is that he has now return from his journey, and we have to show how he's now a different person, either by a decision that he makes or something that he does, that he is a new person. And if that's true, and he has been transformed, then we have the return with the elixir, which means he everything kind of wraps up very nicely for the character at this point. At the end of the story, sometimes there's some kind of celebration. There could be a wedding, there could be some kind of gathering with friends. Sometimes it's in romances. It's just a happily ever after moment. But there's something good at the end that rewards the character for going through this journey. Now, again, you might not have all of these elements, and it all depends on how you want to end your story too. So, is it a happily ever after? Is it a story that maybe doesn't have that happy ending at the end of the story? So you still have um, all these plot points that you're putting into your outline, but they change depending on what your goal is, right? So if your goal is really not a happily ever after, maybe your character doesn't change. Maybe your character, it's more of a tragedy or a tragic story, which is kind of what I'm thinking for my story that I'm currently writing. Well, then he's not going to return and have a happily ever after exactly, right? But he still has to go through all of these changes. And at what point, is it that middle point? Is it that last threshold or doorway at the end of Act Two, where the character is supposed to prove that he really did change and he doesn't, right? Then where does that lead the character? What happens then? So, you still use these same points to outline your story, but it takes the story in a different direction depending on how you choose to, end your story really. So knowing the end, of course, or having some idea of what the end is going to look like is going to help you so that you know what's going to happen in some of those main points. Okay, so what is outlining then? The outline is actually being able to write down all these and then fill that in. Right? Think about what's going to happen at this point. What's going to happen here? How is that going to lead to? How is that going to lead to the big ordeal in the middle? How is that? How is he going to get over that ordeal? What's going to happen here? So that is your outline. Is just putting in all of these points that need to be in the novel. Now, one thing that to me, it is part of the hero's journey, but it's not super clear, and it's sometimes I can get left out if the writer isn't, it doesn't actually write this down and make it clear that the character does have that external goal. Well, it's like, okay, that is part of the hero's journey, right? Yes, it is. But make sure that it's super clear to you and to the reader that there is an external goal as well as an internal goal. So a lot of times people, right, are unhappy with their ordinary life for a certain reason. Most of the time, it's an emotional reason. They're unhappy because they can't find love. They're unhappy because they are poor and they're not finding wealth. They're not finding the security that they need. They're lacking something, and it's usually emotional. And so, you can't make it just about that, though. There has to be an external goal too. So, yes, they may be looking for security, but then how does that transfer into something that the character wants, that the character can go and try to get, that will give that character security? It could be a great job. It could be a nice home, right? It could be leaving a very poor situation, a poor town, to go to try something different. So, what does that translate into an actual goal? How does it translate into an actual goal? So make sure that you have that, um, and then um, and then make it clear why the character wants that. Like, what is this going to give the character? So, this kind of goes a little bit into some backstory for the character that you need to understand. But what is creating this? What is guiding him, and why does he want this? So you at least need to understand that so that you can show this in your story. So I like to write that down, make sure that I really understand that. What is it that he wants, both internally and externally, and what how is he going to get that? Why does he want that, and how is he going to get that? Something else that again isn't really part of the hero's journey, but that I do like to write down in my outline is, what is my character's main flaw? So one of the reasons that the character is going to have a difficult time getting what he wants, right, or he's going to have a difficult time when he gets to the midpoint of that story, is because of a character flaw. Something in this character has created the situation that he is living in prior to the story, and it has to come out again during the story, because this is what's going to keep this character from reaching his goal. So what is that flaw? What is the problem with this character that you want to show in your story? And then, what are some scenes that you can write to show this character flaw? And probably the last thing that I like to write and that I include in my outline, and I've spoken about this before, is the significant story question of the story. Okay. And I actually am going to have a class that I'll be announcing soon on this, because this is a big part of your story. It's, what is your story really about? What is the question that your story answers? So think about somebody that reads your story. Once they're finished and they close your book, what is it that, and I hate to say the word theme, because it's more than theme. It's not like, what is the theme of the story, but what is it that your character is taking away from this? So when they close your book, they're going to say, oh, that's what it's like to be a struggling single mother. Oh, that's what it's like to be accused of a crime that one didn't commit and have to face jail time. Oh, that's what it's like to be a stranger in another country. Okay. So whatever it is that your story is about, when they finish your book, they should be able to answer that question. Okay. So what is it like to be a single mom and struggle through life? Okay. Well, this is what it's like. Read this book, right? This is what it's like. These are some of the scenes. These are some of the things that happened to her. And that's what it's like to be that person. So I think some of the most satisfying books that I know that I've read, when I finish reading the book, doesn't matter if it's fiction, doesn't matter if it's a memoir, doesn't matter, well, nonfiction is a little different, obviously, but any story that I read, when I finish it and I close it and I think, wow, okay, now I understand what, at least partially, what it's like to be a person like that. Okay. I understand what it's like to fall in love. I understand what it's like to fall in love and lose the person that you were in love with. And, uh, and then search the rest of your life for another love that is like that first love. So what you want to be able to do is ask yourself that question. Okay, what is that significant story question that I have for my book, that through my story my reader will understand? That I don't want to tell my reader what it is, right? I don't want to tell them I want my reader to read my story and be able to close that book and feel the answer to that question. Even though they don't know the question, they know the answer because you answered it in your book. It's really cool if you can do that, and you will do it if you think about it. If you think about what is it that I'm trying to show? What am I trying to explain to my reader? I always have that question in my outline because I refer to it a lot. It's like, okay, is this scene showing this? Is this chapter showing this? Is this book showing this? Okay, so by the time I'm done, all the scenes have built up to answer this significant story question. So I hope that this helps you, and I hope that you do create an outline, because again, it's going to make it so much easier for you when you start to write your book, and it's going to keep you from doing some or having some of the problems that I had at the beginning of my writing career, which was having a great time writing all kinds of scenes that later on I had to say, well, how does this scene fit in here? Yeah, it really doesn't. I need to toss it out. I need to start again. And then I have a gap here between the scenes I'm keeping and the scenes I'm getting rid of, and I need to get rid of it. So how do I do that? And then I have to rewrite. So it'll help you to avoid all of those things if you just have a very basic outline of what your story is about, what you want your key points to be. Okay, so I hope this helps. If it does, please hit the like button, hit the share button, and please come back and see me again next Friday for my next writing tip.